In this video, we're going to be talking about changes in market equilibrium. Okay, so in the previous video, we talked about, we put the demand curve and the supply curve on the same graph together for the first time, and we discussed how equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity is determined. In this video, what we're going to do is we're going to incorporate shifts in demand and shifts in supply and examine how those changes affect quantity demanded and quantity supplied. All right, so let's start by drawing the graph that you will, if you're taking an intro to economics course, the graph that you will be seeing in your sleep, probably the upward sloping supply curve and our downward sloping demand curve. And let's ask ourselves the following question. What would happen to price and quantity if the demand curve shifted to the right? Okay, now there is a way of trying to go through the logic. Like a lot of students tend to try to go through the logic in their own minds, and sort of tease out the implications, the logical economic implications of a shift in demand or a shift in supply in their own heads, and that's fine. I think that's a really good thing to do. But what I would recommend, at least if you're taking a test, is to simply draw the curves, just like I did here. Okay, so when I was taking intro to microeconomics, when I would see a question like this on a test, I wouldn't even bother trying to go through the logic. I would just draw the curves and see what happened visually. Now, of course, for this video, I am going to talk about the intuition. Okay, but I'm also going to show you how to do a quick and easy visual demonstration for yourself to essentially get the right answer every time. Okay, okay, demand shifts to the right. So demand increases. Okay, that's case number one. So first of all, what is our initial equilibrium price and quantity? Well, again, determined by the intersection of our demand and supply curves, right? So equilibrium quantity, equilibrium price. Okay, so now the demand curve has shifted to the left, so we're going to draw our new demand curve here. Sorry, it has shifted to the right. Well, it's very simple. What is the new intersection? The new intersection is here. Okay, so therefore, equilibrium quantity has increased, and so has equilibrium price. Okay, so a rightward shift in the demand curve leads to price going up and quantity going up. Okay, what is the intuition behind this? Well, when the demand curve shifted to the right, okay, it created a shortage at the initial equilibrium price, okay? Remember, demand shifts to the right, okay? So if the price had stayed here, right, you would now have more quantity demanded than quantity supplied, right? This would be your quantity demanded, this would be your quantity supplied. So if you've created a shortage, and as we discussed in the previous video, the shortage puts an upward pressure on prices. And of course, when price goes up, suppliers want to supply more of the thing. So therefore, there's also a rightward shift in the equilibrium quantity. Okay, so that's the intuition, right? But really, to get the right answer, all you really need to know is what these curves actually look like. Okay? Okay, so that's if demand shifts upwards. What if demand goes down? So What if we have a decrease in demand? What happens then? Well, let's draw the curve once again, okay? So we take our initial demand curve and we shift it to the left. Let's call this D prime prime. And we simply draw our new equilibrium point using the initial supply curve, right? And we can see that the exact opposite happens, right? We have a downward shift in price and we have a downward shift in quantity, okay? What's the intuition for that? Well, very similar, right? When the demand curve shifts to the left, this creates a surplus, right? So, if our price were still PE, right? Quantity demanded would be here, quantity supplied would be here. That is a surplus, and that puts downward pressure on prices, as we discussed in previous videos. And so as price goes down, suppliers supply less of the good, so quantity moves to the left. Okay. So that's shift in demand. All right. And now let's talk about a shift in supply. Okay. So let's draw our initial supply curve. In our demand curve, we have the initial equilibrium quantity and our initial equilibrium price. And now we want to know what happens when supply increases. Okay. So, how do we draw an increase in supply? We draw a rightward shift in our supply curve. Let's move this over here. So, this is our new supply curve, and we're wondering what happens when supply goes up. Okay. Well, as before, we draw our new equilibrium point. By the way, I did not put in the E there. The graph went, Okay, let's leave it. Okay, so supply curve shifts to the right. We've got our new equilibrium point. New equilibrium quantity and new equilibrium price. Okay, so what do we find? Well, we find that our quantity has increased and our price has decreased. So price goes down, quantity goes up. Okay, so what is the intuition? Well, once again, it's about surplus and shortage. So, had the initial price stayed the way it was, okay, our quantity supplied would be this right here, and our quantity demanded would be this right here, right? So this is a surplus, and surpluses put downward pressure on prices. And when prices go down, consumers want more of them, so the quantity moves to the right. Okay, that's the intuition behind that. Okay, finally, what happens if supply decreases? Represented, of course, by a leftward shift in the supply curve. New equilibrium point here. New equilibrium quantity here. New equilibrium price. So that's an increase in price and a decrease in quantity. Okay, once again, what is the intuition behind this? Well, if price had stayed at its initial point, this would be the quantity supplied, and this would be the quantity demanded, and that would be a shortage. Shortages put upward pressure on prices, and as prices go up, consumers want more, less of the good rather, so quantity moves to the left. Okay, so that about summarizes what happens to equilibrium price and quantity when the curves shift. Again, if you want to get the right answer in an exam situation, just draw the curves. Okay, draw the curves. There's no substitute for that. Find the new equilibrium point, and you will be able to tell visually what has happened to equilibrium price and quantity. Okay, now let's look at a situation where both of the curves shift. Okay, I'm just going to do one example of that, or maybe a couple. So again, you could have the curves shift an infinite number of times, and the process for figuring out what the answer is will always be the same. Okay, it'll just be draw the new curves. Okay, so let's say the supply curves shifts to the right. So we've got our new supply curve here, and the demand curve also shifts to the right. So we've got our new demand curve here. Well, our equilibrium quantity, right, has clearly increased. But how about our equilibrium price? Okay, so this is clearly an increase in quantity. But how about our equilibrium price? Well, it might seem over here that there's a slight increase, okay? But that's actually not correct. Why is that not correct? Well, because I just said that there was an increase in demand and an increase in supply, but I didn't say by how much. Okay? Let's say we had a very, very, very large increase in demand with a comparatively small increase in supply. So let's say the demand curve had shifted all the way out here. Well then, clearly, this is an increase in price, right? Okay, but what if the demand curve had shifted, but by a very, very, very tiny amount, so only to here, let's say? Well, then we would have had a decrease in price. Okay, so in other words, the effect on price is ambiguous. Okay, so the effect on price, we just don't know, because it depends on how much the curves shift by. Whereas this shift in quantity, this is very, very clear that it increases. It doesn't actually depend on by how much the curves shift by. Okay, so when you're doing this kind of question in general, okay, and there are videos with practice questions on this, so I go through a lot more examples if you need. When you're doing a question like this, just be careful to not jump to any conclusions, okay? Sometimes the change in quantity or price is ambiguous when you have both curves shifting, okay? See you in the next video.